Welcome to EKU Then and Now. I'm your host, Paul Blanchard, and I retired recently after a 35-year career as a faculty member and administrator at Eastern. This monthly series will focus on prominent EKU faculty, staff, and alumni who have had a meaningful involvement at Eastern during its history of more than 100 years. They will comment on what EKU has been like during its storied past, how it has changed, and what we might expect its future to hold. Our special guest this month is Roy Allison, a former president of the EKU National, now International Alumni Association. Mr. Allison graduated from EKU in 1954, and that same year married wife Nancy. Roy received a commission in the U.S. Marine Corps and served 3 years, attaining the rank of first lieutenant. After his release from active military duty, he became a teacher and basketball coach, first at Junction City High School and 2 years later at Hopkinsville High School. He left the field of education and became a personnel officer at Western State Hospital, Kentucky Department of Mental Health. He was promoted into the agency's central office in Frankfort and eventually became director of hospital services for the entire department. In 1969, he purchased the Harris Insurance Agency in Harlan, Kentucky, and in the years following, the agency grew from a staff of 2 to 10, becoming the largest insurance agency in Harlan County. He retired in 1989 and moved to Lexington, Kentucky, leaving his sons to run the insurance company. Roy was appointed mayor of the city of Harlan in January 1979 and then elected to this office in November 1979, serving 1 term and choosing not to seek re-election. Not many people can say that. He's been much involved in the EKU basketball program, both past and present, and serves as coordinator of the McBrayer Family Reunion at EKU, serving this committee each year as they coordinate their annual basketball reunion for former players of Coach Paul McBrayer. We will talk more about his memories of Coach McBrayer during our discussion. Thank you, Roy, for being our guest on EKU Then and Now.
Thank you for having me, Paul. I appreciate it.
And I should add that Roy is a good friend. We've sang in choir together, and so he's a man for whom I have the highest respect. Going back, I guess, more than 50 years, Roy, tell us a little bit about coming to EKU in the early 1950s. What attracted you to Eastern? Were you recruited by Coach McBrayer? How did that work?
Yes, but let's go back just a little bit. I watched Eastern play in the OVC tournament in Louisville. The OVC was new at that time. I was impressed with Coach McBrayer. I was impressed with his demeanor on the bench. I was impressed with the way his team played. They played hard. They were very aggressive. They were fundamentally sound, and as they say nowadays, they really got after you. Mm-hmm. And I liked that. The only thing I have to admit to you that I didn't like at that time was the color of their uniforms. I wasn't a fan of the color maroon, although my thoughts about that changed later on.
But now you're talking about when you were still in high school?
I was a senior in high school. Mm-hmm. I was lucky enough to be invited to Eastern by Coach McBrayer to try out. Now, back in those days, most colleges had tryout periods for incoming freshmen, and based on these tryouts, you were or were not offered a scholarship. So I came to Eastern on a weekend with a number of other high school seniors, and we tried out. Following this tryout period, Coach McBrayer offered me a scholarship, which I very gladly took and accepted.
Remind our guest and your host here, when did Coach McBrayer come to Eastern roughly, and how long?
He came here in 1946.
Okay. And stayed until? And
he was here for 16 years. Now, I don't know where that puts that to, but he was here for 16 years.
Into the early 60s then?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what about the non-athletic experiences at Eastern? What you were from a small town. Of course, Richmond was a small town too in those days. What was it like coming to a relatively small college, I guess.
Well, I really wasn't from a small town. I grew up in Louisville.
Oh, okay, okay.
So, so I was coming from the big city to a smaller town, and as I think back, I had no period of adjustment coming to Eastern. I never suffered one bit from homesickness or anything like that. I loved it from the very beginning, and was so happy that I made the decision to come here.
Okay. And who were some of the folks that helped you along the way in those early years? Did you have a special faculty mentor or advisor?
My favorite faculty member was a man by the name of Dr. L.G. Kinnemer, who taught geography and geology. He was quite a character, and I'm sure you've heard of him. Yeah. And he would have to stand out as my very favorite faculty member.
Tell us some of your other memories of the campus back in the early 50s. It's, you know, I came here in 1970 after the boom of the 60s, and so I can't picture Eastern much before that time.
Well, it was much smaller for one thing, and it was convenient to walk anywhere you wanted to go on campus. You had no excuse for being tardy for a class because the buildings were not that far apart, and but the thing about it, so we didn't know any better. We didn't know that one day Eastern would be the size that it is now. We took it for what it was then, and it was a very lovely and a very nice place to be.
And where did you live?
The basketball team lived in Sullivan Hall.
Okay.
Which is right next to the girls' dormitory, Burnham Hall.
And that's that kind of old traditional dormitory right there across from the ravine.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. How did you balance your academic studies with the demands of basketball and other extracurricular activities?
That was really tough for me, and I think it was for most athletes at that time. When you endured one of Coach McBrair's practices and were able to drag yourself over to the Student Union building to eat supper, and then drag yourself over to the dorm, you felt like doing anything but study. In fact, a lot of times you'd go right to bed. So what I did was to study early in the morning, and then during those periods where you have a free period, you have a 9 o'clock class, then one at 11, so in between there, you can do some studying. Now that's the way I did it.